Our topic tonight is Abenomics and what has happened to it. So I think we actually may have talked about this a year or two ago, but
okay.
let me give you a brief background. So the starting point is for the last 22 years, the Japanese economy on average has underperformed. So average annual GDP growth for the 22 years works out to about 0.9% a year. Probably, if you were to calculate a potential growth rate, it would be somewhere between 1.5% and 2%. So they were growing more slowly than they could have been. And of course, in that period of time, they had a major banking crisis, and they had an earthquake, and they had the Great Global Recession in 2008, all kinds of things, particular things happened. So, in any case, 2011, there's the earthquake. That is a negative impact. There's a response to that. The economy starts growing, but in 2012, somehow the growth amazingly peters out and turns back into a recession. People are unhappy. The party that was in power gets thrown out in an election in December of 2012. The old Liberal Democratic Party comes back into power, and of course that means the party's president, Shinzo Abe, becomes prime minister. One of the reasons they won that election was that Abe and a set of advisors to him had proposed a new set of economic policies to try to get Japan out of these 2 decades of underperformance. And I left out that on average prices have been falling since the mid-1990s. So Japan is the first country in the world since the end of the Great Depression, or the beginning of the Great Depression, to experience deflation for a prolonged period of time. So he comes in and he says, yes, we're going to have something, and of course immediately his PR flacks dubbed it Abenomics. So, it's a set of policies identified with him personally. And there are 3 parts to it. It was supposed to be a coordinated set of 3 different policies. Monetary policy, fiscal policy, and structural/deregulation change. All right, so let's look at the 3 different pieces of it. Probably the most important and at least the most successful part of it has been the first part, or the first arrow, monetary policy, which the goal was to get the Bank of Japan to adopt relatively radical quantitative easing. It turns out that Abe was exceptionally lucky, right? That the election and his entrance into office and his proclamation of this policy came at a time when the governor and the vice governor of Bank of Japan were coming to the end of their fixed terms, and therefore, at the end of March 2013, he was going to get to pick the next governor and the next vice governor. So he does that. And of course, picks people who are known to be in favor of quantitative easing. So the very first policy board meeting that the bank had, early April of 2013, they come out with what for the Japanese was a truly radical thing. The Bank of Japan is going to double the monetary base in a 2-year period, with the goal of restoring the economy to 2% positive consumer price inflation and 2% real GDP growth. Right? Now, the policy board actually consists of 9 people, and Abe only appointed 2 people that year. But apparently, the governor and the vice governor were sufficiently persuasive with the rest of the board that they went forward with this fairly radical policy. You may have noticed in the press just 2 weeks ago, they're now a year and a half into this policy, and they are not at 2% positive inflation. And it's a little uncertain where real GDP growth is going. And so they have now adjusted it and said, we will be even more expansionary in quantitative easing, with a goal of trying to still get to that goal. So that seems to have been pretty, well, at least effective in terms of changing the policy. Whether they actually accomplish the goals remains to be seen, but they appear to be pretty dedicated to doing that. So that was the first arrow. The second arrow was supposed to be fiscal stimulus, temporary fiscal stimulus, to supplement the monetary policy, right? So I thought what they meant at that time when it was first announced, that look, you can do the monetary policy, but if the economy is actually facing a classic Keynesian liquidity trap, even if you expand the money supply, nobody wants to do anything with it. And so the fiscal stimulus part was to say, well, let's pump up government spending temporarily to provide the kind of jumpstart demand for all those funds that are sitting out there in the bank. We'll do some construction projects. So now, contractors have bigger payrolls and they want to hire more people. And that helps to stimulate things. And those people, restaurants will have more business and they'll want to borrow more money. And because we've expanded the monetary supply, the money is just sitting there waiting to be borrowed. That seemed to be what they were up to. And very much like the Americans in 2009, almost as soon as Abe came into office, they did pass a supplementary budget for the existing fiscal year. And it represented a 14% increase in, if you added it onto the regular budget, total spending would have increased by 14%. And everybody in the press said, wow, this is a great thing. Look how aggressive they are being. Well, there were two problems with that initial media view of what Japan was doing. Problem number one is that
how much is real water back 20 years?
Well, there is that issue as well. Yes, I wouldn't even get into that one. Let's assume that it was all real water. Right? The Japanese government virtually every year has a supplementary budget. Right? They work in a fiscal year of April 1st to March 31st. And usually in the fall, so the regular budget is voted on late March, goes into effect April 1st. Usually at some point in the fall, there is a supplementary budget. In 2011 and 2012, there were actually pretty major supplementary budgets because of the earthquake and tsunami damage. Right, so to really see what has happened to the budget, you got to add up the regular budget and the supplementary budget and say, so what was the total for the year? If you look at that, actually, the budget for Abe coming in halfway through the 2013 fiscal year, the 2012 fiscal year. So he's coming in toward the end of that. They got the supplementary budget. It was still less than the full year budget for fiscal 2011. So it looks like he did a great thing, but actually the stimulus packages in the year before that were so big that, in fact, total government spending was scheduled to go down, not up. That's one thing. So there's kind of smoke and mirrors going on here. The second thing is, the Japanese, again, did the same thing that we did and the Europeans did, was you do the supplementary budget, and almost immediately the political discussion shifts to the exact opposite. Oh my God, we just increased the government deficit. Ooh, government deficit, it's too big. Japanese debt's going up. Ooh, we got to do something about that. So very quickly the discussion shifted from any more stimulus, which they haven't done any since then, since that initial stimulus, but supplementary budget, to we got to get the fiscal house in order. And so, last April 1st, April 1st of this year, they raised the nationwide sales tax. It's actually more like an American sales tax than a European value-added tax. They raised it by 3 percentage points from 5% to 8%.
But that was already in legislation before Abe took office.
That's right.
It was, yes, and then he approved it and said, yes, we'll let this go forward. And now the question is whether they'll have the next 2 percentage point increase next year, which is currently up in the air. We'll talk about that later. So that's, it shifted back to will we let this go forward? And the decision was yes, we will. It has had the predictable temporal shift of consumer behavior. Everybody went out and bought new cars in March, and nobody's been buying new cars since then. So you artificially push GDP up, and then you artificially push GDP down, and it confuses the hell out of everybody trying to figure out, so what is really going on with the economy? So I would say they were less successful on the fiscal part. And let me add, by the way, that Hugh Patrick had an interesting program today at lunchtime, a former vice minister of finance coming and talking about Abenomics. And he really didn't talk about fiscal stimulus. He said that the fiscal part of Abenomics was to restore the fiscal credibility of the government. And I thought, maybe he forgot what they were doing a year and a half ago. But and the notion is that everybody in Japan and around the world is so worried that somehow Japan is going to explode, interest rates will go through the roof, inflation will go through the roof, that it's important for the government to raise taxes, cut spending, to restore credibility. I found that very interesting, that the whole notion of what this fiscal part of Abenomics was seems to have shifted. All right, so that's the second part. The third part was kind of longer term, and was supposed to be about further deregulation or other kinds of structural, regulatory, legal changes to increase the long-term growth path of the economy. Frankly, I don't quite know what to tell you about this because it is so big, so hairy and uncontrolled, and it's hard to say something concise about it. Every 6 months, they've put out a progress report. The progress reports tend to be on the order of 120 pages long. That gives you an idea of how disparate this thing is. And it actually reminds me of when I was at the American Embassy in the 90s, when all of this started. 1994, the Japanese government decided they were going to put out a big deregulation package. The government assigned each ministry to come up with things that they could deregulate. And so it was just a huge mess. All kinds of little nitpicking things. Lots of pages, but what did it all mean? There was just no sense of that. This is kind of like that. And so you get stuck having to comment on little individual pieces of it and saying, oh, is this good or is this not good? So I'll give you one example. Agriculture. We all know Japanese agriculture is highly inefficient. Not a very big part of the economy. It's less than 5% of employment. It's only, 2 or 3% of GDP. But it's hugely inefficient. People spend more money, more of their income on food purchases than, say, Americans do. Okay. Maybe that's because they want to eat better food. I don't know. But in any case, they spend a larger share of their income on food than do Americans. So you say, all right, so we need reform back. What should that be? The good part of that is a long overdue consolidation of Japanese farms, right? So Japanese farmers have been really hampered in substituting capital for labor because their farms are so small, right? So even today, most Japanese farmers are out there with a rototiller as opposed to being on a big tractor pulling a cultivator behind or on a big harvesting machine, something like that. And so, sure, farm consolidation is good. They're trying to do that. That's good. But they're only doing it at the moment in specified special economic zones. Right? This sounds like China in 1981. I think I can understand that for China, where you're trying to reverse several decades of communist rule, communist economic policy, and you're a little bit hesitant about how you can pull it out. You got a huge country. Japan, geographically compact, market economy. Why not just go out and say, hey, this is what we're going to do for the whole country? Couldn't do it. So it's at the moment restricted to these places. But the bigger thing, there's two bigger issues here. Number one, at the same time that these progress reports tout, oh yes, we're establishing a farm bank that will lend money to people to buy farmland. They also have a paragraph in these reports about, yes, and we're going to encourage farmers to grow new crops. Oh, and what are those new crops? Soybeans, corn, wheat. Wait a minute. These are the three biggest agricultural exports from the United States to Japan. It makes no sense to try to grow these in Japan, even if you could triple the size of Japanese farm from 3 acres to 9 acres, because you grow this stuff in the United States in farms of 1,000 acres. So why are they doing this? It makes absolutely no sense. So that, so you get the good, you also seem to be taking a step back. The second thing is, if you really want to reform Japanese agriculture, do it through TPP. Right? So that part of Abenomics and part of this third arrow was Japan will join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and they did. And so the report says, yes, we accomplished one of our goals. We joined the negotiations. But what are they doing in those negotiations? They are trying to minimize the concessions on opening up Japanese agricultural markets. There seems to be a little inconsistency here. You want to reform agriculture, and you're trying to minimize what is probably would be the most important driver of agricultural reform in Japan. Right? So that's agriculture. I could go on and on and on and on and on about other pieces of this third arrow. I'll just throw out one other. On a positive note, this is the first time I've seen a Japanese government actually respond positively to the notion of more foreigners in Japan. The population's going down. The working age population's been going down now for 20 years, since 1995. And so if you want Japan to grow, you want to fix the fiscal problems for Social Security and national health care, how about having some young foreigners come and work in Japan? Great. So what are they doing? Ooh, let's expand the so-called internship program, or trainee program, I guess it's called, from, so foreign workers can come to Japan and get training in Japan. The current program is let them stay for 2 years. The revision is let them stay for 3 years. But they still have to go home. This is not immigration. This is guest workers coming in and then politely pushing them back out. Or the Justice Department was, or the Justice Ministry was asked to revise the visa rules for skilled people from abroad. Yes, they did it. And their estimate of how many more skilled workers would come to Japan was that it would be an annual increase of 500 people. I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. So at least they address the issue, and who knows, if you want to be optimistic, you can say, look, this is just the first year and a half of this. It's supposed to be an ongoing process. Maybe it will get better, and bigger things will happen. But I don't know. And so kind of all of this third area of deregulation, structural change, and changes in corporate governance, and on and on and on, is very, very hard to figure out how much difference, if any, that it's going to make. So, to sum up, Monetary policy, yes. They luckily, because they could appoint 2 people to the Bank of Japan, seem to have had some success in a pretty radical change of policy. Fiscal side, they didn't really do all that much, and they quickly backed off, making the same mistake that the Americans and the Europeans have made. And in the third part, it's just a big hairy mess out there, and who knows? We won't know for another 10 years whether they really made that much of a difference. And on that, I'll stop.
Okay, thank you very much.